The ship was falling apart around Jake Morrison as he tried to keep it flying. Sparks flew from broken panels and smoke filled the small cockpit. The navigation computer had died 3 hours ago, leaving him flying blind through unknown space. His hands moved quickly over the controls, but nothing was working right anymore. "Come on, you piece of junk," Jake muttered as he pulled hard on the steering stick. The ship shook and groaned like an old car on its last mile. Through the cracked window, he could see a planet getting bigger and bigger. It was blue and green, which meant it might have air he could breathe. That was good news because his oxygen tank was almost empty. The bad news was that he was going to crash no matter what he did. The ship hit the atmosphere like a rock thrown into water. Everything started shaking so hard that Jake's teeth rattled. The heat shield was already damaged, and now it was glowing red hot. He could smell something burning that was not supposed to burn. The altitude meter spun down fast. 5 miles high. 4 miles. 3 miles. Jake strapped himself in tight and said a quick prayer to whoever might be listening. The ground was rushing up at him now. He could see trees and rocks and what looked like buildings in the distance. The ship's emergency systems were screaming warnings at him, but there was nothing left to do except hold on and hope. The crash was loud and violent and seemed to last forever. Jake felt like he was inside a giant washing machine full of rocks. Metal twisted and glass broke, and everything that was not tied down became a flying weapon. Then suddenly it was quiet except for the hissing of escaping air and the crackle of small fires. Jake hung upside down in his seat for a moment, checking to see if anything was broken. His head hurt, and his left arm was sore, but he could move everything. That was better than he had expected. He unbuckled himself and fell to what used to be the ceiling. The emergency exit was jammed, but he managed to kick it open after a few tries. The air outside was thin but breathable. The sky was purple instead of blue, and there were 2 small suns hanging low on the horizon. Jake looked around at the wreckage of his ship and shook his head. There would be no fixing this mess. The engine was split in half and the fuel cells had leaked all over the ground. He was stuck on this planet until someone came looking for him. But first he needed to figure out where he was and if there was anyone around who might help him. The buildings he had seen during the crash were about 2 miles away. They looked strange, all curved and smooth like they had been grown instead of built. There were tall towers that seemed to glow with their own light, and bridges that hung in the air without any visible support. Jake gathered what supplies he could find in the wreckage. His emergency kit had survived the crash, so he had some food, water, and medical supplies. His radio was broken, but his personal communicator still worked, though it was not picking up any signals. His sidearm was missing, probably thrown somewhere during the crash. His environmental suit was torn in several places, but it would still protect him from the worst of whatever this planet might throw at him. As he walked toward the strange buildings, Jake noticed that the ground was covered with a thin layer of what looked like metal dust. It sparkled in the light from the 2 suns and made a soft ringing sound when he stepped on it. The air smelled clean but different, like ozone after a thunderstorm mixed with something sweet he could not identify. The buildings got more impressive the closer he got to them. They were huge, some of them reaching high into the purple sky. The walls seemed to be made of some kind of crystal that shifted colors as he looked at it. There were no windows that he could see, but there were openings that glowed with soft light. No vehicles moved on the streets, and he could not see any people walking around. Jake was about a mile away from the buildings when he saw the barrier. It started as just a shimmer in the air, like heat waves rising from hot pavement. But as he got closer, he could see that it was something much more serious. The air itself seemed to be alive, twisting and turning in patterns that hurt to look at. Lightning danced between invisible walls, and the ground on the other side looked different somehow, like it was not quite real. He stopped walking and studied the barrier carefully. It stretched as far as he could see in both directions, forming a perfect circle around the city. There was no way around it and definitely no way over it. The barrier rose up into the sky until it disappeared into the purple clouds above. Jake pulled out his scanner and pointed it at the shimmering wall. The readings made no sense. The device detected gravity fields that changed every few seconds, energy levels that would fry most electronics, and temperature variations that went from freezing cold to melting hot in the same small area. Whatever this thing was, it was designed to keep people out. Or maybe to keep something in. As he stood there trying to figure out what to do, Jake noticed something moving on the other side of the barrier. Shapes that might be people, though they moved in a way that seemed wrong somehow. They appeared to be watching him, but he could not make out any details through the twisted air. Jake activated his communicator and tried to send a general distress signal. Maybe whoever lived in the city would hear it and decide to help him. The signal went out, but there was no response. Either they could not hear him, or they did not want to talk. The sun was getting lower in the sky, and Jake knew he would need shelter soon. The temperature was already dropping, and his damaged suit would not keep him warm through the night. The city was the only place he could see that might have what he needed, but the barrier stood between him and safety. He had two choices. He could try to find somewhere else to spend the night and hope that help would come in the morning, or he could try to get through the barrier and take his chances with whatever was on the other side. Jake looked at the deadly wall of energy one more time, then at the broken remains of his ship in the distance. He thought about his crew, scattered somewhere on this strange planet, probably facing the same choice he was facing now. He thought about his daughter back on Earth, waiting for him to come home from another routine mission that had turned into anything but routine. He took a step toward the barrier. The air began to hum with power, and the lightning danced faster between the invisible walls. But Jake kept walking forward because sometimes the only way out is through. Jake took his first step into the barrier and immediately felt the world change around him. The air became thick and heavy, like walking through invisible mud. His skin tingled as energy fields brushed against his damaged suit. The temperature dropped so fast that his breath came out in white clouds, then suddenly became so hot that sweat beaded on his forehead. But he did not die. He did not even feel particularly uncomfortable. The gravity field hit him next, trying to pull him down to the ground with the force of a giant hand. Jake bent his knees slightly and kept walking. Growing up in the heavy gravity of Mars' colony had made his bones dense and his muscles strong. This felt like coming home after a long vacation in zero gravity. Behind him, hidden in observation towers that Jake could not see, the Zephyrians watched in growing confusion. Elder Vex Talon pressed his face against the viewing screen, his eyes wide with disbelief. The human should have been crushed by the gravity field within seconds. Instead, he was walking through it like it was nothing more than a strong wind. "Check the barrier systems," Vex Talon ordered his technicians. "Something must be malfunctioning." The technicians ran quick diagnostics on all the barrier components. Everything was working perfectly. The gravity field was operating at full power, strong enough to flatten a battle tank. The energy discharge was at maximum levels, deadly enough to disintegrate solid rock. The temperature controls were cycling through their full range from absolute zero to stellar heat. "All systems are normal, Elder," reported the head technician. "The barrier is functioning as designed." "Then why is the human still walking?" Vex Talon demanded. On the other side of the barrier, Jake was asking himself a different question. Why was this supposed to be difficult? The gravity was strong, sure, but not stronger than the construction work he had done as a young man on Luna. The energy fields were impressive, but they reminded him of the static electricity storms on Titan that he had walked through dozens of times. The temperature changes were annoying, but not worse than the weather back home in Minnesota. He paused for a moment to let his suit adjust to the latest temperature shift. The barrier was cycling from freezing cold to burning hot every few seconds. But Jake's body was already adapting. Humans were good at that. They had evolved on a planet that tried to kill them in 100 different ways every day. Ice ages, volcanic eruptions, floods, droughts, diseases, predators. Earth had thrown everything it could at humanity, and humanity had survived by becoming the most adaptable species in the galaxy. Not that Jake was thinking about evolution at the moment. He was thinking about his daughter Katie and the camping trips they used to take in the Rocky Mountains. The weather there could change from sunny and warm to freezing cold and snowing in the space of an hour. Katie had learned to dress in layers and keep moving when the temperature dropped. She would have handled this barrier better than most adults. The thought made Jake smile, which confused the Zephyrian observers even more. The human was not just surviving their ultimate defense system, he was enjoying it. Perhaps he is using some kind of advanced technology, suggested one of the technicians. Hidden armor or personal shields. Vex Talon focused the scanners on Jake's suit. The readings showed extensive damage to the environmental protection systems. The human was walking through the barrier in a broken suit that would barely keep him alive in normal conditions. There were no energy shields, no gravity compensators, no temperature regulators. Just a man in a torn suit, walking through certain death like it was a morning stroll. Jake reached the halfway point of the barrier and stopped again. This time it was not to adjust his suit or catch his breath. He had spotted something interesting in the energy field patterns. The way the lightning danced between the invisible walls reminded him of the plasma welding techniques he had learned in engineering school. There was an elegant beauty to the design that made him want to study it more closely. He pulled out his scanner and took some readings. The technology was far more advanced than anything humans had developed, but the basic principles were familiar. It was like looking at a master painter's work and recognizing the brushstrokes even if you could never create something so complex yourself. Fascinating, Jake murmured to himself. I wonder how they solved the resonance cascade problem. The Zephyrians heard his comment through their surveillance systems and nearly fell over in shock. The human was not just surviving their death trap, he was analyzing it. Like a tourist studying the architecture of a famous building. He is examining our defenses, whispered one of the technicians. What if he finds a weakness? What weakness? Vex Talon replied, his voice strained. He is walking through the barrier with no protection. We are the ones who are defenseless. Jake finished his examination and continued walking. The second, half of the barrier, was supposed to be even more deadly than the first. The gravity field became chaotic, pulling in different directions at the same time. The energy discharges came in rapid bursts designed to overwhelm any shielding system. The temperature swings became more violent and unpredictable. Jake adjusted his pace slightly and kept going. The chaotic gravity reminded him of the centrifuge training he had done as a pilot. His inner ear and balance systems, trained by years of flying in three-dimensional combat, automatically compensated for the changing forces. The energy bursts were bright and loud, but they seemed to pass around him rather than through him. His body's natural bioelectric field was somehow out of phase with the barrier's sensors, making him nearly invisible to the targeting systems. The temperature swings were more annoying than dangerous. Jake had spent years working in the extreme environments of space construction, where one side of a space station could be freezing while the other side was hot enough to melt metal. He had learned to ignore his body's temperature sensors and focus on the job at hand. Right now, the job was getting to the city and finding a way to contact his crew. Everything else was just background noise. Behind him, the Zephyrian observers sat in stunned silence. Their most sacred defense, the barrier that had protected their holy city for 300 years, was being casually strolled through by a being they had never encountered before, a being that seemed to treat their ultimate weapon like a minor inconvenience. Elder Vex Talon made a decision that would change the course of galactic history. He opened a communication channel to the Zephyrian homeworld and sent a message that would reach the highest levels of their government within hours. Emergency priority, he began. We have encountered a new species. They appear to be immune to our defenses. Recommend immediate contact with Galactic Council. The humans have arrived. Jake reached the three-quarter point of the barrier and decided he was getting thirsty. He stopped walking and pulled out his water bottle from the emergency pack. The energy fields crackled around him like angry lightning, but he paid them no attention as he unscrewed the cap and took a long drink. The water was warm and tasted like recycled air, but it was wet, and that was what mattered. He looked around at the deadly light show surrounding him and nodded with what looked like professional appreciation. This was some impressive engineering, even if it was trying to kill him. In the observation tower, Elder Vex Talon felt something crack inside his mind. The human had stopped for a water break. In the middle of the most dangerous defense system ever created, this strange being was having lunch. Are we certain the barrier is active? Vex Talon asked for the third time. Completely active, Elder, the head technician replied. His voice had a high, stressed quality that suggested he was close to panic. All systems are operating at maximum power. The energy output alone should have vaporized any known material. The gravity fluctuations should have torn apart molecular bonds. The temperature cycling should have caused thermal shock failure in any substance we know of. Then what is he made of? Vex Talon whispered. Jake finished his water and put the bottle away. He was starting to understand why this barrier was supposed to be deadly. The engineering was brilliant, really. Whoever designed it had thought of everything. Multiple overlapping systems, each one deadly enough on its own, all working together to create an impenetrable defense. It was the kind of setup that would stop any reasonable attack. The problem was that Jake was not being reasonable. He was just being human. He started walking again, and the barrier responded by increasing its intensity. The gravity field began to pulse, trying to shake him apart at the cellular level. The energy discharges came faster and brighter, turning the air around him into a storm of deadly light. The temperature swings became so extreme that the ground itself began to crack and melt and freeze in endless cycles. Jake kept walking. The pulsing gravity felt like the massage chairs in the pilot's lounge back on Earth. The energy storm was pretty to look at, like the aurora borealis he used to watch. As a kid in Alaska, the temperature changes reminded him of the thermal shock tests he had run on spacecraft hulls, except those had been much more violent than this. He was actually starting to enjoy himself. It had been months since he had taken a real walk anywhere. Space travel meant spending most of your time cramped inside a ship, breathing recycled air and eating processed food. This was the first time in weeks that he had been able to stretch his legs and move around freely, even if the scenery was trying to murder him. Behind him, the Zephyrian command center was in chaos. Emergency alarms were going off. Senior officials were shouting orders at each other. The head of planetary defense was demanding explanations that nobody could give. The chief scientist was frantically recalculating the barrier's specifications, convinced that there must be some error in the original design. "Send a message to the High Council," Vex Talon ordered. "Tell them we need an immediate consultation with the War College, and contact the Xenobiology Department. They need to know about this." "What should we tell them, Elder?" asked his assistant. Vex Talon stared at the human, who had stopped again to examine one of the gravity generators with what appeared to be professional curiosity. "Tell them that our understanding of life in the universe is incomplete." Jake was indeed looking at the gravity generator with interest. The device was about the size of a small building and seemed to be creating localized distortions in space-time. The engineering was elegant and sophisticated, far beyond anything humans had achieved. But the basic principle was familiar from his training in astrophysics. It was like seeing a master craftsman's version of a tool you had only seen in crude prototype form. He pulled out his scanner again and took detailed readings. This information would be invaluable to the research teams back on Earth, assuming he ever made it home. The scanner beeped softly as it recorded the energy patterns and field fluctuations. Jake made sure to get readings from multiple angles, so the engineers could understand how the device worked. "Incredible," he said out loud. "They solved the quantum stability problem with elegant simplicity. Katie would love to see this." The mention of someone named Katie sent another wave of confusion through the Zephyrian observers. The human was thinking about sharing their most advanced technology with someone else. He was treating their ultimate defense system like a museum exhibit. "Who is Katie?" asked one of the technicians. "Unknown," replied the intelligence officer who was monitoring Jake's communications. "Possibly another human. Possibly someone important to him. He speaks of her with affection," noted the xenopsychologist who had been called in to analyze the human's behavior. "This suggests emotional attachment, family perhaps, or a mate." Vex Talon absorbed this information with growing dread. If this human had family, that implied there were more of them somewhere. And if one human could walk through their ultimate defense like it was nothing, what could a group of them do? Jake finished his examination of the gravity generator and continued toward the city. The final section of the barrier was supposed to be the most deadly of all. Here, all the systems worked together in perfect harmony. creating a zone of destruction so complete that even energy itself was torn apart and reconstituted in endless cycles. Jake walked into this final zone and immediately felt the difference. The air became thick and heavy like walking through liquid metal. The gravity field pressed down on him from all directions at once. The energy discharges came in waves that lit up the sky like continuous lightning. The temperature became a living thing that changed not just from hot to cold, but through states of matter that had no names. For the first time since entering the barrier, Jake slowed down slightly. Not because he was in danger, but because the sensory overload was making it hard to see where he was going. It was like walking through a fireworks display while riding a roller coaster during an earthquake. Exciting, but difficult to navigate. He reached into his pack and pulled out a pair of tinted safety glasses left over from his construction days. The glasses cut down on the glare from the energy discharges and made it easier to see the path ahead. Much better. In the observation tower, Elder Vex Talon watched the human put on what appeared to be primitive eye protection and continue walking through their most advanced destruction field without missing a step. Something fundamental broke inside the Elder's worldview at that moment. Everything he had believed about the nature of life, death, and the limits of biological existence crumbled like sand. "Shut down the barrier," he ordered quietly. "Elder?" his assistant asked, not sure he had heard correctly. "Shut down the barrier," Vex Talon repeated, louder this time. "All of it, complete shutdown." "But Elder, the protocols clearly state that the barrier must never be deactivated while there is an intruder in the zone. The consequences could be—" "The consequences are already beyond our understanding," Vex Talon interrupted. "This human is not being stopped by our defenses. He is studying them, learning from them, taking measurements. We are not protecting ourselves from him. We are giving him a free education in our most advanced technology." The technicians looked at each other uncertainly, then began the shutdown sequence. One by one, the deadly systems powered down. The gravity fields faded away. The energy discharges stopped crackling. The temperature returned to normal. Jake noticed the change immediately and stopped walking. He looked around at the now quiet air, then back toward the observation towers he had spotted earlier. He raised one hand and waved in what was clearly a friendly greeting. "Thanks," he called out, his voice carrying clearly in the still air. That was getting a bit noisy. Then he continued walking toward the city, whistling softly to himself. Jake reached the massive doors of the temple and stopped to admire them. They were easily 30 feet tall and made of some kind of metal that seemed to glow with its own inner light. Strange symbols covered every inch of the surface, and the whole thing hummed with barely contained energy. It was beautiful work, really. Someone had spent a lot of time and effort making these doors not just functional, but artistic. The problem was that they were locked. Jake walked around the entrance looking for some kind of control panel or access mechanism. The doors were sealed tight, with no visible hinges or handles. Energy fields crackled along the edges, where the doors met the wall. This was clearly another security system, probably as advanced as the barrier he had just walked through. He pulled out his scanner and examined the locking mechanism. The readings were complex, showing multiple layers of security protocols, energy matrices, and quantum encryption systems. It would take a team of expert technicians with advanced equipment months to crack this kind of lock. Maybe years. Jake studied the readings for a few minutes, then put the scanner away. He looked around on the ground until he found a rock about the size of his fist. It was smooth and heavy, made of the same crystalline material as the buildings around him. Perfect. Inside the observation center, the Zephyrians watched in horrified fascination as the human picked up what appeared to be a primitive stone tool. Elder Vex Talon leaned forward in his chair, trying to understand what the creature was planning to do. "Is he going to try to break down the doors?" asked one of the technicians. "The temple entrance is made of reinforced quantum steel. It would take a fusion bomb to damage it." "I do not think he plans to break it down," Vex Talon replied slowly. "I think he plans to fix it." Jake had found what he was looking for. The door's locking system was incredibly advanced, but it was still a machine. And like all machines, it had moving parts that could get stuck, circuits that could overheat, and resonance frequencies that could be disrupted by the right kind of impact. He had seen this problem before on construction sites. Sometimes the most sophisticated equipment would malfunction in ways that left engineers scratching their heads for hours. But an experienced worker with a good hammer could fix it in minutes by hitting exactly the right spot, at exactly the right angle, with exactly the right amount of force. Jake hefted the rock in his hand, testing its weight and balance. Then he stepped up to the door and delivered 3 precise impacts to specific points on the locking mechanism. The first hit disrupted the primary energy flow. The second hit caused a resonance cascade in the quantum encryption matrix. The third hit triggered a safety protocol that reset the entire system to its default state. The massive doors swung open with a deep, musical sound. Jake tossed the rock aside and walked into the temple like he owned the place. Behind him, the Zephyrian observers sat in stunned silence. Their most advanced security system, designed by the greatest engineers of their civilization, had just been defeated by percussive maintenance. He fixed it by hitting it with a rock, whispered one of the technicians. Impossible, replied the head engineer. The quantum encryption alone should have prevented any kind of brute force attack. The resonance dampener should have absorbed any physical impact. The safety protocols should have locked down the system if anyone tried to tamper with it. Apparently, said Elder Vex Talon in a voice that sounded very tired, we did not account for humans. Inside the temple, Jake found himself in a vast chamber filled with wonders. The walls were covered with murals that seemed to move and change as he watched them. Columns of light stretched from floor to ceiling, carrying information in patterns too complex for his eyes to follow. In the center of the room stood a device that could only be the communication array he was looking for. But there was something else that caught his attention first. Against one wall stood a massive crystal display case, and inside it was what appeared to be a book. But this was not just any book. It was huge, bound in metal that gleamed like silver, and covered with the same glowing symbols he had seen on the temple doors. Jake walked over to the display case and read the inscription below it. His suit's translator worked slowly through the alien text, finally producing a rough translation. The Chronicle of Impossibility. Record of all who have attempted the sacred trial and found only death. The book was open to a page covered with names, thousands of them in hundreds of different alien scripts. Each entry included a detailed description of the being who had tried to breach the barrier, their technology, their special abilities, and how they had died in the attempt. It was a record of failure stretching back centuries. Jake whistled softly as he flipped through the pages using the case's external controls. The list was impressive. Military commanders with advanced battle armor, scientists with experimental shielding devices, beings with natural abilities that defied the laws of physics, creatures made of pure energy, robots built specifically to survive impossible conditions. All of them had tried to pass through the barrier. All of them had failed. Quite a collection, Jake said to himself. Then he walked over to the communication array. The device was even more impressive up close. It was clearly designed to send messages across interstellar distances, with enough power to punch through interference and reach any receiver in the galaxy. Exactly what he needed to contact any human ships that might be in the system. The control interface was complex, but Jake had operated dozens of different communication systems during his career. The basic principles were universal: power, supply, signal modulation, transmission focus, frequency selection. It took him about 10 minutes to figure out how to work the alien controls. He composed a simple message and sent it out on all the standard human emergency frequencies. This is Captain Jake Morrison of the exploration vessel Columbus. Ship down. On Zephyr Prime. Crew scattered but alive as far as I know. I am at the local temple. The natives seem friendly, but their security system could use some work. Send pickup when convenient. Morrison out. The message went out at faster than light speeds, encoded with his personal identification codes and ship registration numbers. Any human vessel within 50 light years would receive it within hours. As Jake finished sending the message, he heard footsteps behind him. He turned around to see a group of aliens entering the temple. They were tall and thin, with 4 arms and large multifaceted eyes. Their skin had a bluish tint and seemed to shimmer slightly in the temple's strange light. They wore robes covered with the same glowing symbols he had seen everywhere else. The lead alien stepped forward and made a gesture that Jake's translator identified as a formal greeting. When the alien spoke, its voice was high and musical, like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "Greetings, human," the alien said. "I am Elder Vex Talon of the Zephyrian Council. We have been observing your progress through our defenses with great interest." "Nice to meet you," Jake replied, extending his hand in the universal human gesture of friendship. "I'm Captain Jake Morrison. Thanks for shutting down that barrier thing. It was getting a bit loud toward the end." Vex Talon stared at the offered hand for a moment, then carefully reached out with one of his forearms to shake it. The gesture was awkward, but clearly meant to be friendly. "Captain Morrison," Vex Talon said slowly, "we must ask you a question. That may sound strange. What are humans?" Jake blinked in surprise. "What do you mean?" "We have never encountered your species before," Vex Talon explained. "Our barriers were designed to stop any known form of life. Yet you walked through them as if they were not there. Our doors were sealed with locks that have never been opened by force. Yet you opened them with a simple stone. We must understand what you are, because everything we thought we knew about the limits of biological existence has just been proven wrong." Jake thought about how to answer that question. How do you explain humanity to beings who had never seen a death world? How do you describe a species that had evolved to survive everything the universe could throw at them? "We're just people," he said finally. "We come from a planet that's tried to kill us since the day we climbed down from the trees. Ice ages, volcanoes, earthquakes, floods, droughts, diseases, predators, wars. We've survived it all by learning to adapt, to improvise, to keep going no matter what gets in our way. I guess that makes us hard to stop." Vex Talon processed this information slowly. "Your world tried to kill you?" "Every day," Jake confirmed. "Still does, as far as I know. That's just life on Earth. You learn to deal with it, or you don't make it to adulthood." For the first time in his long life, Elder Vex Talon began to understand that the galaxy was a much more dangerous and wonderful place than he had ever imagined. 3 days later, the human rescue ship Endeavour dropped out of hyperspace above Zephyr Prime. Captain Lisa Hayes was expecting to find wreckage, and maybe a few survivors hiding in the wilderness. Instead, her communications officer immediately picked up a signal from the planet's surface. "Captain, we're receiving a transmission from the Zephyrian Temple complex," the officer reported. "It's Captain Morrison, and he sounds fine." "Put him through," Lisa ordered. Jake's voice came through, the speakers clear and strong. "Endeavour, this is Morrison. Good to hear from you, Lisa. I'm down here having coffee with some new friends. The local hospitality is excellent, though their security system needs some work." Lisa blinked in confusion. "Coffee? Jake, our sensors show you're inside some kind of fortified complex. Are you being held prisoner?" "Not exactly," Jake replied with what sounded like amusement in his voice. "It's a long story. Can you send down a shuttle? I've got some people here who are very interested in meeting more humans." 2 hours later, Lisa found herself sitting in the Zephyrian Temple, drinking something that tasted remarkably like coffee, while a group of alien scientists asked her rapid-fire questions about human biology, psychology, and culture. Jake sat nearby, looking completely relaxed and occasionally answering questions with the casual tone of someone discussing the weather. "How do humans survive in gravity fields above 15 standard units?" asked Dr. Senthquar, the lead Zephyrian scientist. "We build up muscle mass and bone density," Lisa replied, still trying to process what she was seeing. "Heavy gravity worlds are common in human space. We adapt." "And energy discharge resistance?" "Our nervous systems evolved to handle electrical storms," Jake interjected. "Lightning strikes are fairly common on Earth. Most humans can survive a direct hit if they're lucky." The Zephyrian scientists exchanged glances and made notes on their data tablets. Elder Vex Talon leaned forward in his chair, his 4 eyes focused intently on the 2 humans. "Captain Hayes," he said, "we must ask you the same question we asked Captain Morrison. What exactly are humans? Your species appears to be immune to dangers that would destroy any other known life form. Lisa looked at Jake, who shrugged. I told them we're from a death world, he said. They're having trouble with the concept. Death world? Lisa repeated. Jake, Earth is just a normal planet. To us, Jake said. To them, it's apparently the most dangerous place in the galaxy. Dr. Senth Quar activated a holographic display showing a three-dimensional map of known space. Thousands of worlds were marked in different colors. Blue for safe worlds, yellow for moderate danger, orange for high risk, and a few scattered red dots for extreme hazard zones that were barely habitable. This is our classification system for planetary environments, the scientist explained. Most civilized species evolved on blue or yellow worlds. A few hardy races come from orange worlds, though they require extensive technological support to survive elsewhere. Where would you classify Earth? Lisa asked. The hologram zoomed in on human space and highlighted a single world. It was colored deep black. We had to create a new category, Dr. Senth Quar said quietly. Your planet exceeded all our previous danger classifications. Extreme weather, unstable geology, deadly radiation, toxic atmosphere in some regions, aggressive predators, and a gravity field that would crush most species. We cannot understand how any life form could evolve there, much less develop intelligence in spaceflight. Lisa stared at the black dot that represented her home world. It's not that bad, she said weakly. Captain Hayes, Elder Vex Talon said, gently, your planet has experienced at least 5 mass extinction events. Each one destroyed most life on the surface. Yet somehow, life not only survived, but became stronger. The final product of this process was humanity. You are literally evolution's answer to the question, how do we build something that can survive anything? Jake finished his coffee and set down the cup. Speaking of survival, I should probably mention that my crew is scattered around your planet somewhere. They'll need pickup. Already taken care of, Lisa said. We found them yesterday. They're all fine, by the way. Lieutenant Foster said the local wildlife was friendly. Apparently, she spent the night in a cave with some kind of predator that she described as like a big sleepy dog. Dr. Senth Quar made a choking sound. She encountered a Vrex hunter. Those creatures are apex predators. They have claws that can cut through steel and venom that can paralyze a full-grown Gorthak. Amy mentioned it tried to lick her face, Jake said. She thought it was cute. The, Zephyrian scientists looked at each other with expressions that needed no translation. They were beginning to understand that their entire worldview was going to need some major adjustments. Elder Vex Talon stood up from his chair and walked over to the Chronicle of Impossibility. With great ceremony, he opened the ancient book to a blank page and began to write. The other Zephyrians watched in silence as he made the final entry in their record of failed attempts to breach the sacred barrier. When he finished writing, Vex Talon closed the book and placed it back in its display case. Then he walked over to a control panel and began shutting down the temple's defensive systems. "What are you doing?" asked one of the younger scientists. "I am decommissioning the Omega barrier," Vex Talon replied. "It has served its purpose for 3 centuries, but it is no longer relevant. Any species that could send humans to challenge it would not be stopped by it, and any species that could not send humans would not be worth stopping." "But Elder," the scientist protested, "the barrier protects our most sacred sites." "The barrier was designed to keep out invaders," Vex Talon said. "Captain Morrison is not an invader. He is a visitor. There is a difference, and we must learn to recognize it." Over the following weeks, the cultural exchange between humans and Zephyrians transformed both civilizations. The Zephyrians shared their advanced technology and scientific knowledge. The humans shared their practical engineering solutions and adaptive strategies. What had started as a chance encounter became the foundation for a lasting alliance. The Omega Barrier was eventually converted into a training facility for human military personnel. What the Zephyrians had designed as an impenetrable death trap became a moderately challenging exercise course for Earth's armed forces. Marine recruits would jog through it as part of their morning routine, much to the amazement of visiting alien dignitaries. Jake Morrison returned to Earth as a hero, though he never quite understood what all the excitement was about. When reporters asked him how he had accomplished the impossible, he gave an answer that became famous throughout human space. "I just treated it like any other day at the office," he said with a shrug. Sometimes the best way to solve a complicated problem is to ignore the complications and focus on what needs to get done. The Chronicle of Impossibility was eventually donated to the Galactic Museum of Natural History, where it became one of the most popular exhibits. Visitors from across the galaxy would come to read the thousands of entries detailing failed attempts to breach an alien defense system, followed by the final entry that simply read, "Human, no technology, no powers, no fear. Problem solved with percussive maintenance. Security system retired due to obsolescence." But perhaps the most significant change was in how the galaxy viewed the concept of impossibility itself. The Zephyrian barrier had stood for centuries as proof that some challenges could not be overcome. Then a human had walked through it like it was nothing more than bad weather, and everything the galaxy thought it knew about limits and barriers had to be reconsidered. As Elder Vex Talon wrote in his final report to the Galactic Council, "We have learned that impossibility is often just a failure of imagination. The humans have shown us that the universe is far more resilient and wonderful than we ever dared to believe. We recommend immediate diplomatic contact and cultural exchange. Also, we suggest upgrading our definition of ultimate defense system. The galaxy would never be the same, and that was exactly as it should be.